Welcome back to the Sitting Comfortably podcast. This is Laurel Lindstrom speaking, reading from the Draftsman. This is, I think, our fourth episode. We're still in chapter 1. We've learned a little bit about who Martin is, where he lives, why he lives there a little bit, how he got there. And in our last episode, I think we described how Martin found his way down to his new house. Okay, so here we go. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. After the M4 and M25, his journey was peripatetic, meandering but gradually less scary. There were many halts to smoke and reconsider the route, but Martin never stopped long enough for the fear to rise. From the radio, Crazy was blaring. I remember when I lost my mind. Although, slightly better than that. Well, a lot better than that. Yes, from the radio, Crazy was blaring when Martin finally arrived at Shadowhurst, many hours later. The fear was gone, and in its place a sense of a monster squashed, of Martin being in control again. You really think you're in control? The radio said. He switched off the engine, remembering how the ribbons of roads had unrolled ahead of him in constant invitation, tempting, daring him to keep on moving ahead, to reach out just that little bit faster. But he resisted, and never was he entangled. The flashes of drivers' faces as he passed were a living cartoon, telling momentary stories, fleeting windows into other lives. The edges of the carriageway blurred the details of grit and broken glass into faceless grey as he passed. Littered debris fluttered and danced a frantic show before falling limp and tired to wait for the next thrilling uplift and another performance. The monsters' roar grumbled their soundtrack, a chorus of pistons and combustion, all in time and singing curious harmonies to a shared refrain. It was the first time Martin had driven a car since he passed his test in 1987, but that was part of the purpose, the challenge. And screaming down and variously back up the A23, the A22 and the A21 had been just enough for Martin to win. By the time he reached Catsdown, Martin had already forgotten the thrill, though, and again was the extraordinary made routine, black and white once again prevailing. In the kitchen, Alison was talking again, her voice slow and low, not wanting to too suddenly distract him. He sat down at the kitchen table, patient and listening to the binary static slowly rising in his brain. He was waiting for that inevitable and reliably reassuring Alison conversation. It's the conversation she needs to have with him so that she can be sure of him. Will be able to let him go for a little while, let go her anxiousness, at least for a little while, at least until the next time. It's the wallpaper conversation, the one about what happens next and why and how and who, and it absolutely doesn't have to be a dialogue. It's a habit they share, so Martin knew that the occasional grunt would do by way of acknowledgement, just so that she knew he was listening. That was all she needed for reassurance, for absolution. Ever was it thus with them. Alison sat down deliberate and slow and picked up her pen. She started going through her list, her voice getting slightly louder as she marked off each item. She threw in the occasional hum for added impact, and between hums she spoke slowly, ponderously, aware that Martin wouldn't pay attention yet. But she wanted his attention. The conversation had to begin with an opening act, the warm-up for a one-man band, in anticipation of the main event. Shopping, feed store, petrol. Alison had to have visibly ticked off at least 4 items before she could expect a response, even a grunt. Get house keys from solicitors. Tick. Order and oversee installation of oversized stainless steel fridge freezer. Tick. Make sure ice and water dispenser fully functioning. Tick. Almost fill fridge with bubbly. Tick. Add 48 small tins of tuna fish. Tick. 5 ticks later, Martin, another cigarette on the go, nodded and said, "Yeah, thank you," as he watched her check through the list, eyes narrowed and immaculate nails gleaming coral pink. Without looking up, she dropped her voice to a half-whisper so that he had to pay attention. He didn't really. Eyes still narrowed and fixed downwards on her list, head to one side, she said in a distracted, slow mumble, almost a monotone, as if they were trading secrets, "You need to tell me if the furniture is as you want it, so that we can get it moved if you don't like where I've put it." Martin almost just agreed, but momentarily assertive, he stood up. A shaky hand brushing specks of ash from the dark blue velvet, he headed off out into the hall and towards the sitting room. Alison rose slowly and picked up the cigarette he had left on the edge of the table. Nurturing it over a cupped hand, she dropped it into the sink, ran the tap for a second, and followed her brother. The sitting room at Shadowhurst is not particularly large. L-shaped, with an open fireplace at one end, the long side has 2 sets of double-glazed doors opening out onto the terrace. The views across the once unkempt lawns to the lakes and fields, with woodland beyond, are still broad and generous, in stark contrast to the dwarfish house. Standing there on that first day, Martin felt the house's slow, low breath, its hollow sigh, that curious calm again. Perhaps it was the quiet. In the stillness, his fizzing static seemed to slow to something less familiar, more a sort of muffled hiss. Together they stood on the terrace, looking out across an overgrown mess of gardens in various flat and dead green shades. Beyond the beds they saw lichen-pitted and measled grey statuary, heads bent to share sad forgotten confidences. Shivering and friendless maidens were leaning in the lazy chill, brambles shoved aside heraldic lions, clawless, in decline, and too feeble to fight back. Marooned stonework lay powerless and silent. Weeds and molehills, moving on towards different and more energetic conversations. Motionless, they watched as the lakes rippled occasional teasing patterns of watery blacks and greys under a whispered breeze. The air, tiptoeing across the surface, left in its wake a hint of subdued sparkle, of something silent, hidden and unspoken. It might have been the long-lost glimmer of an idea, floating for a brief while before sinking away from the light. The woods beyond the lake, bare and friendless, their naked branches reaching into rising mists, seemed to be waiting. Turning back into the room, he said, "It's all fine. Really it is. You've done what I want." Alison sighed and smiled, calm and reassured, absolved once more, at least for a little while. Martin's sitting room is carpeted with the thickest possible white wool, with super-insulated underlay. Its expensive, triple-twisted, moth and stain-resisting expanse is disturbed only by a single, very large, nubuck leather sofa, dressed up with gaudy velvet cushions scattered in reds and purples. When Martin first saw them, he raised an eyebrow at Alison, an interruption she felt before she looked up involuntarily from her list. I know you didn't ask for them, but I thought you'd like them, especially in velvet." A moment's pause. I can take them away again," she ventured. "No, don't. They're fine. It's all fine." Turning away from the colour, he saw the wall-mounted Macintosh amp, receiver, turntable, CD player, and the shelf of CDs lined up like soldiers waiting for orders, all there. He smiled and appreciated Alison's placement of the sofa, centred at the perfect listening distance, his vinyls close by out of the light and well away from the fireplace. "Thanks for this," he said, and sat down. "No need to change anything." Another cigarette, lit only momentarily, before he threw it into the dead grate. Alison, another shock, managed to smile and check herself. Good. It's going to work out, you know. It's going to be fine." Martin wasn't sure what to do with his hands and looked back, his face once more a blank, his hands tight on his knees. She noticed the face's 2 early lines, the shades of faded breeze-block grey, and the usual vague broodiness darkening his expression. He went and looked out of the windows behind her. The afternoon shadows had started creeping across the lake, a slow flow drawing shadows into darkness. Birds were hurrying home, cheeping and piping loud and shrill their good nights. Urgent cries, lancing sharp across the greying dusk. "Joshua, is that you? Oh, good, good. Yes, he's here. I know. He's probably on silent." Handing the phone to her brother as he watched the slowing light, she said, "It's Joshua. He rang before, just when you were arriving." Martin looked at the phone a moment before deciding to take the call. "Hiya. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. No, not much. Are you coming down?" Martin wasn't really sure if he wanted Joshua to come down or not, but he knew he should ask. He'd been told that he should ask because this is polite, and polite is what Joshua expects. It had never occurred to Martin that other people might expect it too. He remembered again he must do better. Joshua had given him the little lecture about manners after the last incident at the London flat, the one with all that chaotic blonde hair. Martin had misread everything about the situation, inviting an overly familiar, agenda-driven stranger into his filthy flat. There had been an unexpected and sudden turn from flirting prospector to a fuming monster. Horrified by grunge and stench, revolted and totally knocked off track. "What do you mean you don't want sex?" Martin had said. "We can just do it here," gesturing to his unmade bed with its landscape of oily alien stains and crusted creases. In his anxious guest, anger and panic started gently to simmer and the heart rate to rise. Joshua had arrived as the conversation hit a precipice, along the lines of, "I thought we were going somewhere." "No." The big blonde, backing out of the flat as Joshua was coming in, suddenly felt Joshua's body warm and solid behind, and this had only ramped up the fear and the volume, a little leap forward serving only to make matters worse. Joshua stood motionless, bemused and patient, closing the door behind him and gently patting at the air before raising his hands in mock surrender. Martin declined to fill in any details or make introductions, standing instead stock-still, scowling, annoyed and aroused. What was the problem? Joshua looked at the germophobic idiot, excessively lunched and liqueured and drunk, whose mood had so suddenly swung from arousing anticipation to overwhelming revulsion and confusion. Joshua figured that tears and heartbreak would come along in the next few moments, so he handed his briefcase to Martin and tried to calm the blubbing mess of snot and acrimony and disgust. As he carefully took an elbow and turned towards the door, he opened it and gently ushered their visitor out, handing over the readies by way of a gift and apology. Martin handed Joshua his ringing phone to answer and leaned against the door jamb, watching. The sobbing slowly subsided, and his no longer friend wobbled off in slow and uncertain steps towards the lift. Martin listened as Joshua told Alison mostly what was going on. Alison, at the other end of the phone, listened slightly confused, yet unsurprised, and then she had told Joshua all about Shadowhurst. We'll learn more about Shadowhurst in the next episode. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you join us again soon. Bye-bye.